but there's so many reasons why. It's important for your identity to everything to know where you came from.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. And welcome to episode 205, and today I'm speaking with Gina. Hi, Gina.
Hi, Lily. How are you?
I'm good. This is called Gigi's Story because you were also called Gigi growing up and by your raising family. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, and we both live so close to each other. I wish we were able to do this in person. I'm sorry, I haven't quite figured out how to do it live with multiple microphones, but maybe one day. You're in Minneapolis, right?
I'm in St. Paul, but we're still pretty close.
Thank you for doing this today on a Sunday with me. And let's get right into it and find out more about Gina, find out more about Gigi.
Alrighty.
All right. So tell me who was in your raising family and what your childhood was like.
Well, I was raised the youngest of 6. I had 3 sisters, 2 older brothers, and they were all quite a bit older than me. The closest in age was the youngest brother of my 2, and he was 8 years older. So, I wasn't raised with my older sisters. I think Julie was 15 when I was born, Lana was 17, and Rhoda was graduating high school right before my mom had me. So when I was growing up, they were all out of the house. My brother Rocky was out of the house, and Julie left, I think, when I was about 5. So I think I was in kindergarten, and it was just me and Dino. And Dino and I are really close, and he's still my closest sibling to this day. I knew something was off growing up, but I couldn't pinpoint what. There were stories, of different hardships that my parents had. I'm almost 60. So, back then when they were starting their family, World War II was happening. They had children young. My dad had joined the Navy. And so my mom was staying with his family who spoke Spanish, and she did not. So there were just some challenges, language barriers and different cultures at that time. And so she had, when my dad got out, they had the first 2 girls in Rocky, boom, boom, boom. Then they had Julie, and then they had Dino, and then there was a stretch, and then they had me. So during their early marriage, there were hardships because of, there was a depression, there was World War II, there were just, different struggles that were happening. And when my dad got out of the Army, he drank a little bit, and they were so young when they had all those kids, he wanted to kind of go out and have a little bit of fun. And so, he didn't always come home. So that was hard for my mom. And I remember hearing those stories growing up that, they had their struggles, but they managed to get through them. I would just listen. I didn't question much because I was so little, so what I could understand, I remember it in the back of my mind, but I never questioned or asked, any other details. But apparently, throughout their marriage, my mom had a friend, and as my older siblings, were growing up, and this was before I was born actually, one of my sisters found some letters, and it caused a rift in the family, and it caused her to kind of be sent away, for lack of a better description. So there was a lot of turmoil in the family, and there were struggles between my mother and my second oldest sister. And she went to stay with one of my dad's sisters in California. And so she was gone for a while before I was born, and then she came back. So I heard some of those stories, and it didn't quite make sense. I didn't really know what happened there, but, everything seemed to kind of go back to normal because, my parents were really loving people. And there was a lot of laughter when the siblings did get together. But Lana eventually moved to California and stayed there. She met someone, got married, came back here to get married, and then went back and lived her life in California. And then Julie, when I was in kindergarten, I believe, left to go stay with Lana. And I remember a lot of arguing between my parents because my dad had gone to California to visit Lana, and Julie went with, and then Julie stayed there and never came back. And so I remember my mom crying, that the girls were in California. And, I think she blamed my dad for bringing Julie and not making her come back. But, she had already graduated high school. Lana was an adult. My oldest sister was starting her family. I just didn't understand all those dynamics. I was still too small. I just knew it was very upsetting. And it was something that they argued about on and off for a while.
Mm.
It wasn't until years later as an adult that I kind of understood those reasons why, and I'll get to that in a little bit. I knew something was off, but I feel like my parents, they were really protective of me and Dino. My mom was really, really strict. I couldn't go a lot of places as I was growing up. I had friends that, were able to go to Camp a Windigo. That was the kind of the special thing you could do in the summer, and go swimming and boating and doing all these fun things. And I wasn't allowed to go. She just kept a really close eye on me. And I remember kind of feeling frustrated that I didn't get to do anything that my friends got to do. There were certain movies I couldn't see. Just, they were just really, really strict. And I was raised Catholic. I went to St. Matthew's School, which is now closed. And I went there through seventh grade. And then all of a sudden, after seventh grade, we just stopped going to Catholic church at all.
Hmm.
And, I had a lot of questions about that because, I was getting to the age where you would make your confirmation and, different things that would happen in the church, your first communion. I had made my first communion. But all of a sudden, we weren't going to Catholic church anymore, and I didn't understand why. And we started going church hunting. Years later, I found a letter that my mother's mother had written to her about church, and she was anti-Catholic and said some pretty scathing things about, Catholics in general. And so there was, now this religious piece of it. But I found comfort in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I loved going to school. I loved the people that I went to school with. I was happy. And later on, when I went to college, I ended up going to the College of St. Catherine because that was, something that I was important to me to go. But anyways, there were, all these changes in a short period of time. that I can look back on now that was kind of traumatic. Because then when we stopped going to Catholic church, they pulled me out of the Catholic school. So they found a different school for me. It was a Christian school. And then I ended up graduating with a group of 12 people.
Mm.
And that's a whole nother story because there were probably things happening there that shouldn't have been. And again, that's a different type of religious trauma.
Yeah.
Just differences in the type of prayer, the type of worship, the interpretation of scripture, all the things that I had learned that meant something to me as a Catholic were then, expressed to me that those were wrong. And that made me question everything. And so I started paying attention more to what was happening in my life and at home. And I rebelled a little bit, and mostly because my mom was so strict, I acted out a little bit. I opened my mouth more toward her. And had I known what was really going on, I wouldn't have done that. I think had everyone been honest with me back then, it could have saved so much, so much angst, so much questioning of what was happening in the dynamic of our family. Because my parents, looking from the outside, they were beloved. They were Wally and Pat. Everyone adored my parents, and especially my dad. He was charming, he was handsome, he was congenial, he could dance, he was kind to everyone. And my mom was very much a homebody. She seemed sad sometimes, and I couldn't put a finger on why, because my dad would have done anything to make her happy. So in my young mind, I just thought, they went through a lot that they probably shouldn't have, but she should be grateful for what she has. We had a pretty little house. My dad would have done anything for her. She would be home in her house coat with hair rollers in her hair. And he didn't care. She didn't have her makeup on or anything. He would just come up behind her when she was cooking and pull her away and try to dance with her. He was always holding her hand. Anytime we were in the car, he was holding her hand. So I just didn't get, why she was so angry with him all the time. In spite of all the stories we heard and the different things, how, they kind of went back and forth. I just saw a lot of love there. And I knew that, all of our cousins that I was raised with and my dad's family, he was very much beloved. My mom, on the other hand, her mother had her when she was, I think, 15, and she was married. Her and my grandfather had gotten married. They had my mom, and then they had my Uncle Bud, and then they got divorced when my mom was still a toddler. And so she always said she was heartbroken that her parents couldn't have worked it out. And then her mother remarried and had two more children. And then that marriage didn't work out. And then she married a third time, and she married someone that was my mom's age. And she went as far as telling her new in-laws that my mom was a friend of the family because she didn't want her third husband's family to know, one, how old she was, and two, that she was a grandmother. And so there was a lot of, I guess, secrets in the family. And so those secrets, I thought, okay, well, that must be why my mom is the way she is. She's got this crazy relationship with her mom that she loves so much. And I always thought my mom's mom was mean. She had a different kind of personality and very overzealous with her religion, kind of like the fire and brimstone Baptist type of view of the world. And anything else was bad. And so that kind of all kind of helped me understand why maybe she was behind why we left the Catholic Church. I don't know. There was just so much. And I knew our family was different from some of my friends because we had a large family and my parents were older. So they were 38 and 39 when they had me. But as I was kind of growing up, I felt, well, they managed to pull their shit together to some degree by the time they had me and Dino because it seemed more calm, still strict, but more calm than what I overheard, my siblings talk about when they were together or when they would
Yeah.
come to visit.
Did you ever have any warning signs that you were an NPE when you were younger?
No, except for the question I had as to why Lana left for a year when she was younger. So it's really hard to explain. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what. And I knew that it had something to do with Lana, which I ended up being right in a way because she had found letters that were exchanged between my mom and my biological father. So, because she was confronting my mom as an angry teenager and my mom wanting those letters back, my dad tried to be the peacemaker and arrange for Lana, from my understanding, to stay in California with his sister. And this has been verified by other family members, and I'll get into that shortly. But
Okay.
my dad knew about my mom's relationship with my biological father, and I didn't know anything of him until I took my first DNA test with 23andMe in 2018. So I never knew that my mom had a relationship outside their marriage. I knew my dad had. I had heard my mom crying many times at night and heard things I probably shouldn't have heard. But I didn't know when those things happened. I didn't know if they were happening now or if they'd happened when I was little, or I didn't know the time frame. But I know that there was a lot of pain between them. And my dad never yelled at her, never raised his voice to her, never seemed aggressive towards her. It just seemed like he wanted our family to be together. And I think she wanted that too. But I know that, she was heartbroken. You could see it, and she didn't really go anywhere. She didn't drive. And when I think about now, when she would have found out she was pregnant with me, she wouldn't have been able to get her own credit card or get a mortgage or anything like that. And so what I found out, I'll just kind of skip ahead here. When I took the DNA test in 2018, it was shortly after my own divorce, and I was on my own for the first time. And there was a sale, you know, buy one, get one free or something like that. And so I got tests for me and my two adult children just to find out more about our heritage. My results came back that my sister Julie was my aunt. And so then that raised the question again that I had about Lana. And then I thought, no, that can't be. But I did send a group text to my siblings and I said, well, I got my results back and it says this. Is there anything anyone wants to tell me? And all the messages back, no, those tests are a scam. Don't pay any attention to that. And so I kind of let it go because Julie was so upset, and she had messaged me back, and, she said, I can't believe they can destroy families with this information. And, and here they knew all along. So anyways, I let it go. And then in this, let me see, that was Christmas of 2018 going into January 2019. By that September, I got 2 messages through 23andMe from 2 cousins that I never met. Their names are Priscilla and Pamela. And Pamela lived here in Minnesota. Priscilla lived in Washington. I never heard of them. And so they both said, how are we related? And I said, I don't know. I have no idea. And Priscilla sent me some names of family members. And then a short time after that, Pamela sent me some information. And so I went back to my sisters and I said, well, do you know who these people are? Because I got messages from, Priscilla and Pamela, and they're wondering. And my older sisters recognized the family names, and they said, no, we're not related to any of those people. And one of the names was my oldest sister's sister-in-law. So it said that we were related to her family. They reassured me that we were not related to them at all. So then I kind of let that go because of, COVID was starting to happen. And then there was some civil unrest in Minneapolis. And, I was focusing on, staying healthy. And something just wasn't right with what was going on, in my family, because I started questioning. And around that same time of COVID, the older of my 2 brothers, Rocky, had a stroke, a massive stroke. And so Lana had flown back to Minnesota to take care of him. And unbeknownst to me, she had pulled my brother Dino aside, who I'm very close to. And she said, Gina took that DNA test and her biological father is someone different. It's a friend that mom had. And so when she comes asking questions, you need to be there for her. She didn't say we all need to be there for her. We all need to get together as a family and help her. She just dumped it on Dino. So no one mentioned this to me. Dino didn't mention it. Lana didn't mention it. But they were all talking amongst themselves. And so during Rocky's stroke, Lana had actually asked me if there was a way that, since I'm able to work from home, if I could help take care of him for a period of time. And so I went to stay there temporarily. And I knew the first night I was there, it wasn't going to work out. So I told Dino, I'm not going to be able to stay here. And he said, well, did you tell them? And I said, well, yes. And Lana was really angry with me. I mean, she let out so much anger at me that I don't think anybody has ever spoken to me that way. And I was in shock, and I looked at Julie because Julie was there. They had both flown in from California. And Julie didn't say a word. And I just remember feeling like I got kicked in the stomach, but I couldn't cry. So much had happened. I was still healing from my divorce. There was COVID, so I'd been isolated just like everyone else. There was a lot of stress related to work, and I just felt like I had nothing in me. I was exhausted, and I didn't want to argue with her, and so I turned and walked away. And I'd been staying in Rocky's basement, but I still had my lease at my apartment. So I just shut the door and I texted my daughter and I said, I'm not going to be able to stay here. Lana just unleashed some horrible pain on me. And so it it didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, why ask me to come here? Why call me every day for weeks and say I'm needed and that we all need to, kind of pitch in and help each other? It's what mom and dad would have wanted. And then I go there to be treated like that. And so I knew there's something not right here. I knew it in my gut, and so anyways, I moved back to my apartment, and I just wanted a clean slate. So I got myself a smaller apartment in this building, and I had just moved in that Saturday in September of 2021. And by that Thursday, I got into a car accident. So then I was physically injured on top of heartbroken over, something I didn't quite understand. And I wanted to get to the bottom of it. And so I went back to my 23andMe account, and there it was again, Julie is my aunt. I looked at my cousins and I looked at other connections, but there weren't a lot of names on there. So I wasn't able to piece anything together. So I ordered a separate DNA test through Ancestry. And that came, I think, in November or December of 2021. And I took the test, and I got the results back, I think, right before Christmas. And I compared the results with the 23andMe, and there were some similarities, but I couldn't understand the centrum organs and all of those other details. So I reached out to the DNA angels, and I said, can you help? Because nobody is telling me the truth, and I'm seeing things here that I don't quite understand. So my assigned angel was Kelly Grace.
Oh.
And she's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we reviewed it didn't take her very long. I think it took her a day and a half tops. And she said, okay, so here's your tree, and here's dad, and here's your siblings, and I had no words. I wasn't the youngest of 6. I was the youngest of 14. And Lola, who was my oldest sister-in-law, was listed as my biological aunt. And so I told my kids as soon as I found out. And my son looked like my father who raised me. Spitting image. I have side-by-side photos of them on Facebook that the resemblance is uncanny. But he's not biologically my father. And so when I mentioned that my father was someone else, and my son said, well, who do I look like? I think he said it under his breath. And that's when I knew I wanted photos of Joseph. I wanted to know who he was. If my mom had this long relationship with him and my dad knew, why was it kept a secret? So I wasn't going to reach out to anyone specific except for the 2 cousins who had reached out to me. And so I sent both Priscilla and Pamela a message, and I said, I took a second DNA test, and I didn't tell anyone except my kids. And this is what I found out. And I would like at least a picture if you can manage to get one. And a few weeks went by, and I finally got a message from Priscilla. And she actually called me. And she said, hi, it's your cousin Priscilla. And she goes, I can do better than that. We talked a little bit. She goes, I can do better. We have a family reunion photo book with everybody in it. All the families, all the cousins, aunts, uncles. She goes, it's not new, it's older, but we can get you a copy of that. And so she sent it to me, and I got it pretty quickly. And I looked through all these pictures of strangers. it was really hard to look at them when I have cousins on Facebook and now they're not my biological cousins.
Mm.
And then I had to figure out how to tell Dino because I didn't know that Dino knew.
Mm.
And Dino's just as sensitive and somewhat quiet like I am. So, I reached out to his wife, my sister-in-law, Cindy, and, I said, I don't know how I'm going to tell Dino this. And Dino never told her about his conversation with Lana. And so Cindy didn't even know about what, that Lana had pulled him aside. And so we made plans to go to dinner, where we could go somewhere quiet and Dino and I could talk. And we did that at least 3 times before I finally had the courage to say anything. And when I started to tell him, he said that he knew. And he told me what Lana had said. And I just tried to go from there to heal. So I started, I reached out to the counselor who helped me through my divorce, or through my separation and divorce. And she was amazing and helped give me some insight. But it was just a lot, a lot of information coming at me at once. And Priscilla had said that Lola wanted to speak with me and that they had been looking for me because they all knew that Joseph had a daughter with my mom.
So did everyone in your biological father's family and your family know except you?
Yes.
Oh my.
And I have a picture here on my desk of my mom when she was pregnant with me. So it was January 3rd, 1965. Dino gave this to me. So basically, my dad loved me even though I wasn't his.
Mm-hmm.
My siblings may struggle with that, but he didn't. He never gave me a reason to question that he loved me and that he loved Dino and that he loved our mom. Not once. What I found out from Lola is that my biological father, he had an injury while he was in the military. And when he got home, things kind of worsened and he started falling down a lot. And at some point, when he was back and had a relationship with my mom again, my dad, who raised me, and a couple of his buddies, they got into a fight with Joseph and they beat him up. So my dad got arrested and then he was let go. But I just think all these things that happened, anger and jealousy and all these things caused more pain than what they all could handle.
Mm-hmm.
When in spite of it all, my dad loved my mom.
Mm.
Lola said for a while Joseph had gone to live in Chicago, and I think he was working on cars there or opened an auto repair shop, and my mom actually left my dad and went to live with him. I never knew that.
Oh.
And then she came back to Minnesota and her and my dad reconciled, and then I arrived. So he wasn't sure if I was his or Joseph's, but he went to his family and, said, I don't know if the baby's mine. But it sounded like they all encouraged him no matter what. Do what you need to do to be happy. And he had struggled with alcoholism. He was a sponsor with AA.
Mm.
And because of him to this day, I really don't drink. So, there's just a lot of core memories that I have with my dad. And, I have nothing with Joseph. But anyways, Joseph, with falling down and, after being, physically hurt, being assaulted, he just continued to decline, and he was diagnosed with MS.
Mm.
And slowly he lost his mobility and ended up in a wheelchair. And from my understanding, his mother did her best to take care of him at home until it was just physically impossible to do so. So he was put into a nursing home in Inver Grove Heights. And that is the same nursing home that my brother Rocky is in now.
Mm.
And then later he went to the VA hospital. And that's where he died. And throughout his being in the nursing home, my dad would bring my mom to visit him. And all the Ramirez's, Lola, her mother, her sisters, they would be there visiting Joseph. And then my mom would you know, see his mother pull up, and then, she would try to duck out of there. But they would visit with my dad. He would stay in the parking lot and wait for her. So there was always, friendly exchanges. Hello, how are you? They knew each other. The families knew each other. So the strength it must have taken for him to raise me and love me the way he did and bring my mother to see my biological father. I don't know that I'll ever understand it. It's fascinating, and then yet it's upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
Because they never bothered to tell me.
No.
I had no idea. When I was a young adult and starting out with my husband, I used to go to there are 2 different markets on the west side of St. Paul that, I'd buy homemade tortillas, buy them by the dozen, several dozen at a time. My biological grandmother supplemented her income by selling tortillas.
Mm.
So there's just a lot of things, she asked about me, and I never got an opportunity to meet her.
Oh, that's hard.
And Joseph left me in his will. He died when my daughter, who's now 26, he died when she was about 1. And his sister Helen was the executor of his estate. And she went to my mom's and dad's house and said, Joseph left this for her. And my mom said, no, she's doing well. She's married and has a family. We really don't need anything.
Oh.
And when I first talked with Lola, that was one of the first things that she told me, was that he loved my mom and he loved me, and that my dad always brought her to go visit him. And I'm like, when did they do this? Did they drop me off at the roller rink and then they went to go visit him? I couldn't think of any time where they weren't together and that we weren't home.
Yeah.
So they had to have done it, when I was at school or what, otherwise we were together and my mom didn't go anywhere.
This must have been so confusing to find all of this out and to find out they visited your biological father and everybody knew and you didn't. And then to find all this out years later, has to be so overwhelming.
It's still overwhelming.
Yes.
And I talk to Lola maybe once a week, sometimes twice a week. And I think it was Labor Day 2 years ago, I agreed to visit with her. And I knew it would be emotional, and it was. We went to Joseph's gravesite, and it was hard to describe what I felt. I would always be emotional when I would go to Fort Snelling and visit my parents. And my godparents are coincidentally just a row down from them. And I would always feel sad because, I love my godparents and I love my parents, obviously. But when I went to Joseph's, it was just kind of like the rug pulled out from under me again. And, that same day, Lola took me around to meet, her siblings. And they all live within blocks of each other in Newport. So we could have walked to everyone's houses.
Hmm.
And just to know that so many people knew, and I could have found out at any time. I mean, my mom's friends knew. Her best friends knew.
Family secrets are so damaging. What is your relationship like nowadays with your family or your raising family that knew?
Yep. There really is no relationship except for Dino.
Yeah.
Dino and I had lunch with my oldest sister, because I wanted to know why they didn't tell me. And she basically sneered at me and blamed me for finding out.
Oh, right.
Why would you go questioning that? It's none of your business what mom and dad do or our business. And it was almost like she was disgusted with me, with the situation. And I cried in a restaurant,
Yeah.
which I'm usually, I'm sensitive, but, I try not to cry in public like
Yeah.
that. And the tears are just streaming, and Dino was holding my hand under the table. And, he just kept encouraging me, to speak for myself. And just some of the things that Rhoda said to me were so hurtful and so off base. It was just personal attacks to me.
Yeah.
And, the night I left Rockies for good, there was no contact with Lana after that. I mean, she made it clear when she let loose her anger on me. And then she did the same thing to Dino that Saturday that I had moved into my apartment. He had gone there to help with Rocky. And then, she pretty much gave him the same treatment. So Dino, he has the kindest heart. He did one of my sessions with me with my counselor. And she helped him see why it was important for me to find out the truth. Because initially, his way of thinking was, our dad is our dad. Joseph doesn't matter. You shouldn't want to know the truth. But there's so many reasons why it's important for your identity and to everything to know where you came from.
Yeah.
And it was through talking with her. And then we did some conference calls with different family members because I had almost a desperate need to know who else knew. I mean, who knew really? Because a lot of people knew. And so there were family members that admitted, yeah, we remember this conversation and yeah, we remember that. And, we love you. You're still our cousin. But that explains why, when you walk into a room and people just kind of look down and something's up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I felt most of my life and why I chose not to attend a lot of things because I just felt uncomfortable and I couldn't pinpoint why.
Yeah.
But it was because there were whispers behind my back.
Yeah.
Nothing's the same. And I have siblings that I'll never know. I did reach out to through Joseph, I think the oldest brother. And I reached out to him by email. DNA Angels gave me that information. I'm just amazed at the information that they have access to.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, I did send an email just to confirm, because I didn't know, well, they can see me on Ancestry as a sibling, but is there any information they have? Did they know? And I did get a response from his wife, and it was very cordial, but nothing indicated that there would be a desire or interest to know me.
Mm.
And I'm good at reading between the lines, and so I'm not going to press anything or push it. But I did reach out again. I wanted to know if there were any, because of Joseph's MS, did any of the other children, have any symptoms of that or any hypermobility? Because since my car accident that I was in, there were some injuries to me that still haven't healed because I have hypermobility.
Mm.
And I know sometimes that can go hand in hand with, either MS or Ehlers-Danlos.
Oh, okay.
And so I haven't had any genetic testing yet, but, you know, because I was not restrained in the car when the accident happened, there have just been some injuries that, we still haven't settled on that whole issue because I'm still going to physical therapy and getting different
Mm.
treatments. So Lola had thought that one of my siblings had some issues, but, I haven't really gotten many details about that.
Oh, that's so frustrating. It sounds like you haven't received like a full, accurate, detailed medical history.
Correct. Just that
Oh.
there was no heart disease, which, on my dad who raised me, Wally's side, he had heart disease. There was cancer on my mom's side, but on Joseph's, everyone's pretty long lived. He was really the only one that had MS, and as far as I know, none of his children have it. But I also learned that, I'm the ninth child. And so he had children with his wife, and then he had two daughters with someone else, and then he had me with my mom. But he knew my mom. Nobody knows exactly when they met, but it was a very, very long time.
Do you believe Joseph and your mom had a long affair then? You said they knew each other a long time.
Yes, I am safely guessing that there was intimacy for a while. Maybe not, consistent, but it was someone that she knew and someone that she loved for a long time.
Are you the only NPE of your siblings?
Yes, I think that Julie did the 23andMe because she was curious, and me in my since I was not knowledgeable in reading those results. When I first saw that she was my aunt, and I thought, oh, okay, well then there's a connection with Lana. But then I didn't think it was me. Then I thought, oh, what if Julie has so when you kind of rationalize and you don't really understand what the results are you're looking at.
Yeah.
For a second, I thought, oh, poor Julie.
Yep.
But has refused to be tested. And she said that during the lunch we had. And she said, I don't know why you would take that test anyway. So, it's basically blame me for
Yep.
finding out. And Lana, there's no way she's going to take the test. But the relationship between my mom and Joseph was at least as long, you know, as Lana was alive. So yeah, it could have been through their whole marriage because when my dad died, they were all at his funeral, the Ramirez's. And initially, because Helen knew as the executor, from my understanding, she knew which of us But Lola said Lola's the youngest of them. So she was still a little girl. She's not much older than my oldest sister. So, she would have been, a teenager, during the time that my mom was first spending time with Joseph. They weren't sure if it could have been Lana or if it were me. One thing that Lola has said to me repeatedly since we've gotten to know each other, she's like, you need to hold your head up. No matter what's happened, people are human. People make mistakes. You were innocent when you were born, but clearly you were loved. You aren't the first love child ever born, and you certainly won't be the last. So there's nothing to be embarrassed about. You know who you are now. Hold your head up and just know that you're loved.
Gina, if people wanted to get in touch with you personally, ask you any questions or connect with you, could they do that?
Yes, they can.
And what is the best way to get in touch with you?
Probably by email.
Which email would you prefer?
Gina L. Sabanya at gmail.com.
I will write that out down in the show description below for Gina's email address. Gina, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your NPE story. I really appreciate talking to you.
Thank you, Lily.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.